They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Rafal, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
deep into this pool of regrettable situations. It's brought me back to the last time that we were happy.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down to Security Rabbit Hole to yet another edition of the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast. James, it's you and I today.
Man, small crew.
That's right. We've got an interesting topic to talk through. I always like reading the SANS News Bites reports that come out, and every once in a while you get something that you just sort of have to go dig in on. The headline I'm talking about today says GAO: federal agencies have implemented just 65% of cybersecurity recommendations. So that's the headline, and I'll read you the first paragraph, and it says, according to a report from the U.S. Government Accountability Office, the GAO, federal agencies have implemented just 2/3 of the 1,610 cybersecurity recommendations it has made since 2010. The report notes that federal agencies reported 30,659 IT security incidents to the Department of Homeland Security's Computer Emergency Response Readiness Team in the fiscal year 2022. So my response to that is, wow, that's a scary ass headline. That sounds problematic, though. Is it? And I know we'll talk through this, but it's good to have you back aboard, James. This will be a fun conversation for just you and me, just an intimate conversation.
Yeah, no, this is going to be interesting. I was reading through, the article links out to their 98-page report, and I was kind of skimming through some of the information on there, and it's interesting. A lot of big numbers is what we like to throw around in these type of reports. 1,600. Recommendations. They've only implemented, they haven't implemented 500 or 570 of those. Like, they're big numbers, but what do they mean? And I think that's sometimes the hardest thing to drill down into is what does that actually mean from a security perspective? Yeah.
Well, big scary numbers are always make a great headline. And anytime you get these recommendations that say, or these headlines that say, hey, there's 10,000 things to do. You've already only done 5,000 of them. It's like, holy cow, we're not even halfway there. We're halfway there. But to your point, James, does that mean that they're doing nothing? Does that mean that they are they're just struggling? Is there a budgetary issue? So the report is called GAO-24-107231. In case you want to go read it on your own, I did not go read all 80 billionth pages of it. But I did read the highlights section, which I think is interesting. I read that in pretty good detail. Because if you guys remember, there's 4 categories, right? And there's 4 major cybersecurity challenges and 10 associated critical actions. I was looking for the right wordage. And so part 1, the challenge is establish a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy and perform effective oversight. Part 2 is securing federal systems and information. Challenge 3 is protecting the cybersecurity of critical infrastructure. I want to come back to that one. And then challenge number 4 is protecting privacy and sensitive data. And in the grand summary of this, James, what I noticed is there is a lot of talk about legacy systems. Now, there's a NextGov article by David DeMolfo Molfetta? Sorry, man. David, I butchered your name. I sincerely apologize. Molfetta, I think is how that's pronounced. And there's an interesting paragraph in here. In the majority of cases, it comes down to legacy IT systems that are reliable for day-to-day agency operations, but no longer get regular cybersecurity updates pushed to them from the manufacturer, leaving them open to possible exploitation. Boy, I gotta say, that seems like a crappy problem to have.
Yeah. Just a little bit. But, it's always interesting to me when we talk about legacy IT systems. I mean, we understand, right, there's a lot of tech debt out there. But also at the same time, I see this kind of like the ICS era where how much of that is actually being directly attacked and exploited versus something else related to it being attacked, and we indirectly then go and shut them down. I felt like that, like when we talked about Colonial Pipeline, right? I mean, It wasn't that the pipeline was actually directly attacked, right? It's like billing systems and all that stuff. And it's like, hey, if we can't bill, we can't give. Like, that's it. Like, it's going to shut it down. And there was a whole idea around the indirectness of, do I have to attack the water supply directly, or do I just have to attack the systems that control the water supply? Not talking about the actual control systems.
Right.
Right. Like, can I just shut down the billing system and, pick any of these critical things, hospitals? Do I have to attack the X-ray machine, or can I just attack the patient intake system? And now all of a sudden, out of brevity, we shut everything down. Right. And so it's an interesting topic, the idea of legacy, because one, I think we've talked about this 100 times, the cost of replacing legacy systems is absorbent in most cases, right? Not that it doesn't need to be done, but it's absorbent. And, at what point do you sit there and say, okay, I got to do this versus, no, my issue is really here. This is my attack surface, not that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I'm stuck on the big scary number, right? I'm stuck on this 1,610 things to do. This feels like, remember the CIS top 20? Like, it's only 20 things. All you have to do is 20 things, right? Just 20, each with like a lattice of like 20 things under each 20 things, and then 20 things underneath each of those 20 things under 20 things. And before you know it, there's like 47,000 things that you have to do. But look, the government doesn't operate on a magical cash register that never runs out of money, right? Just like every other enterprise.
Are you sure?
Here we go there, James. This time we're not going to go there. That's hilarious, but this time we're not going to go there. So they've got to make choices, and so this is since 2010. There's a lot of things that I would say are, if you recommended to me 14 years ago, 3 years ago even, that may not be relevant today. So I'd be very interested in hearing how, which this doesn't go into in great detail, that since these things have been initially recommended, how many of them should have been retired, superseded, updated? Are there really 1,610 things that are those discrete projects? Are those like, hey, swap out system X for system Y? Are they these big things? And again, I haven't read the full report, and I know I want to, but I suspect it'll put me to sleep one day very soon. Because there really are just like that many important things to get done, right? And if there are, what's the focus on them? How do you get that many things implemented while maintaining system stability, integrity, and availability, and continuing innovation?
It's
easy to pick on this, James, but I want to take the other side and say, this is hard. This is really hard stuff to look at.
Yeah, it's interesting too when you think about the big scary numbers, because if you flip that around, right, they haven't implemented 1/3, which means they've implemented 2/3 of those requirements, right? I mean, if you're talking 1,600 and 500, almost 600 haven't been implemented, you're almost 2/3 of the way, which is pretty impressive in most cases. When we think about exactly what you were saying of we have all these things, the OWASP top 10, if you actually drilled down into it, is like, I don't know, 150 or 200 actual controls that you're looking to implement, even though we say it's the top 10. The recent thing that came out about the software attestation that CISA is now pushing for, that's the same way. There's like maybe 15 things on that software attestation, but if you break those 15 things down, it turns into like 150 things that you're trying to do. But I have to say, since 2010, so we're talking 14 years now, right, that you've had to implement all this stuff. It would be interesting to know how that prioritization was done over time, right? Because even now, right, if we said 500 things to implement, say we took half that time since they did 2/3 of it, like, could you do 500 things in 7 years? I don't know. I don't know what those things are. That's where it gets interesting.
So you asked, and I'm turning to page 13. This says page 13. This says 20. PDF says 23, but it is figure 4, assessment of the Department of Defense's implementation of selected foundational information and communication technology supply chain risk management practices. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. There are 3 that are labeled as partially implemented. So I'll read all of them, and we can kind of discuss it, right? Because this is just an example of the microcosm. Established oversight of ICT risk management activities. That says fully implemented. Develop an agency-wide ICT risk management strategy. That's partially implemented. Okay, so maybe it's not completely done, but you don't even have a strategy in place? Establish an approach to identify and document agency supply chain. That says that's done. Establish a process to conduct agency-wide assessment of ICT supply chain risks. That says it's done. Here's one that should boggle your brain. Establish a process to conduct a risk management review of a potential supplier. Not partially implemented. Okay, I get it. These things are hard, but it's not saying do every one of them. You can't if there's not a process, an established process to conduct a risk management review of a potential supplier. How do you get away with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to not actually, right. It's one thing to not go through and actually do the reviews, but to not have the process for the review in place. Like, that seems like kind of the easier part to be able to get that going, right? Like, it feels like it should be a partially implemented at some point of, hey, we've got the process. How hard could that be to, like, let's take some time and nail that down. And that process should go across all different entities, right? So it's not like you're creating a process for every single department. It should be here's the process, right? And that's something like should be coming out of CISA. I mean,
yeah, and in a move that should surprise nobody under challenge number 1, right? Establishing a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy and performing effective oversight. In a move that should surprise absolutely no one, one of the key bullet points in the highlights section, it says GAO's 2023 government-wide report on AI, shocker, revealed that 20 federal agencies reported a total of about 1,200 current and planned use cases, specific challenges or opportunities that AI may solve. However, many agencies had not implemented AI requirements, not even like not even in any policies and procedures, just basic requirements, such as preparing an inventory on AI use. There were 35 recommendations to address this. However, none of these have yet been implemented. This just look, government's always awful at everything, right? I mean, it's just a fact. But this is like every other. I feel like you could change this to pick your large enterprise company here, and this would apply because there is there's virtually no chance that this is somehow magically different for the federal government. But if you've got 1,200, if you're already at the use cases, like we've figured out what we're going to do with it, we've got stakeholder people are getting ready to do it. Oh, by the way, we don't even have recommendations yet. What?
Yeah, I would agree. Like this isn't limited to the government side of things, right? Like this is any big corporation, I think, has this same type of thing, right? It's the go hard, go fast. And when you switch it back to the conversation about legacy technology and stuff like that, at what point are you sitting there saying, hey, look, we got to move to keep up with competition. We got to keep everything fresh. We got to keep going, helping with profit, keep things going, innovation. Do I stop and go fix what isn't broken, right? And that's the hard part, I think, to sit, is that, hey, that works. It works fine. It works as expected. It's doing everything it needs to do. But I've got somebody coming saying, well, there's a risk that there could be exploitation there, right? Do I stop everything I'm doing to fix that versus, hey, I got a lot of potential with this new technology, and call it AI, call it, whatever the new latest and greatest buzzword is out there. Yeah. But how do you sit there and help stop that of, we're not going to go chase this because we want to go back in time and fix this, right? It's hard to show that ROI on that. I mean, we can sit there and say, hey, this is open, it's vulnerable, and it could cost a ton of money. But to most people, they're looking at it saying, hey, look, that wheel's still rolling down the street. Like, I got no issue with this thing. It's working fine. Yeah, the tread's a little low on it, but why am I fixing what ain't broke, right?
You're not wrong. This is the challenge. This comes back to legacy stuff, things that have been around for a long time, things that are, you've got a diverse amount of and type of user base. You've got everything from soldiers to civilians all over the place, right? And different administrations see things differently, of course, and priorities. I don't know. I read this and I am like, I have this the appropriate amount of shock value. It has the appropriate amount of shock value for me, but it doesn't. But at the same time, this really doesn't surprise me. Nor do I think, on the whole, this is really as bad as it could be. Although, like, some of the things that are in the partially to not implemented are just jaw droppers, especially inside like Department of Defense, right? These are supposed to be the most secure places where Americans' lives are potentially at stake. The safety of our nation is at stake. Secret plans, all kinds of things. And we don't have a basic plan, a basic strategy, a process in place. Like, we haven't even defined that. By the way, we do have all kinds of use cases for AI, though. Like, I
hope one of those use cases is to create a plan.
Right. Don't just download one off of the SANS website like everybody else does and just modify it. But I think this points to a bigger trend, and I don't want to necessarily play the doom and gloom card here, but this starts to feel like there's not a magical fix to this. What would we be considered? Like, what would we say? Oh yeah, that's really good. 100%, all 1,610 of them being done. 60%, 70%, 80, 90, 95, 99. Do we weight everything evenly? I feel like they need to do a better job of perhaps, if not prioritizing, then giving us the high level of, like, the things that aren't done. Why do they matter more than the others? So I'll read you another one that caught my attention. This is from the challenge part 2. It's the first bullet point, right? They've done 221 of 839 recommendations have not been implemented. Okay. So 26% left to go. I would say that's pretty actually good for, if we're talking blind numbers for a large organization, right? But this bullet point, I don't know how to get good out of this. So in January 2024, GAO reported that Inspector General at 15 of the 23 civilian agencies subject to the Chief Financial Officers Act, blah, 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 found their agency's information security programs to be ineffective. 15 out of 23 have found their security programs to be ineffective. Out of 23 agencies, no more than 8 received an effective rating in any given year over the last 6 years of reporting. I don't know how to continue from that.
I don't know if it's unexpected though. I mean, that depends. What are you qualifying as effective in the first place? Okay. How do you define that? I mean, that's a problem. I mean, it's just like the magic numbers that are out here. There's nothing about them. Like the 500 that haven't been implemented could very well be the most important ones. And all they did was, put in check boxes that handled a bunch of these other things. Like, oh, do you have security training in place? Do you have this in place? Do you have?
That's right.
Okay, we can check all these off with a simple, this simple solution. Oh, we're not going to tackle the hard things, right? Like, oh, hey, we force HTTPS now over our stuff. Like, okay, we can check that off. Did it solve a ton? Probably not, but we did it. Versus something that's way more important. It's like, we'll skip that. So we don't really know what is effective. What are the items that are missing? Are they the same across different agencies? Are you sitting here saying, hey, there's one agency that's missing 500 and everybody else is only missing 12? Like, where's that spread happen to know where all this stuff is missing? Because again, I think even the different departments have different tolerances right around that. Like, hopefully the Department of Defense has better security than, I don't know, pick some other different agency that's out there doesn't really do a whole lot. That's
this is the part that concerns me. These reports are I feel like this is the government's version of name and shame. But I don't know that it changes anything. I don't know that it necessarily makes anything better or worse. I don't know that it really helps allocate resources necessarily. Does it make things better for any of the people involved? Does it get somebody budget when they need it? Are any of these things prioritized? And so, like I want to read this with it and take it seriously and recognize that this stuff is a big deal, right? Like this is not a joke. This is serious. There's very real consequences here if things were to go bad, and they do all the time. I don't know. I mean, in August 2023, GAO reported that the Internal Revenue Service's monitoring of efforts to prevent contractors from gaining unauthorized access to sensitive taxpayer information was limited by its incomplete inventory of systems that process and store this information. They don't know. So what you're saying is they don't actually know where our taxpayer data is. So they are inept in their ability to protect it. Okay. This is the same problem every company has. Yep, we take all the patient data. We take all of your sensitive information. And, do we know where it is? I mean, we're trying our best. Gosh, we're trying our best. We're doing the best we can. It's freaking not good enough.
Inventory is hard, right? I mean, that's what we see everywhere. I mean, getting good, clean inventories is a challenge.
On the flip side of that, James, like, you're the FedGov, okay? I mean, if it's not you, then who? And I mean, we could joke about this all day long, but the government at all angles, at all levels, particularly the federal, is probably the most inept thing that you can get in across the board, right? You can't seem to pass bills. You can't argue, debate anything. You can't have civil discourse. You apparently can't take care of cybersecurity. IT is a wild west. Nobody, takes any of this crap seriously, or do they? And it's just that hard. I'm inclined to say, okay, it's difficult, and I'm inclined to give people leeway because we all struggle with inventory. We all struggle with identifying where data is. We all struggle with access control and policies and strategies and such. But in all that time to say, hey, this agency doesn't even have a policy in place. What does that even? I don't know. I don't know what to say other than what in the hell is happening, and does anybody really have any handle on any of this stuff? Because when you look at this downstream and into the private sector, it somehow looks worse in the private sector, James, and this stuff just mirrors over, and it's just as bad, and in some places worse, and in some places better, and it doesn't give us a ton of hope for can we figure information security out.
I think it mirrors pretty closely, right, to what you see in the private sector versus public sector. I mean, they match up pretty well. You're going to have some that are doing really well. You're going to have some that aren't doing well at all. You're going to have hopefully a bunch that are somewhere in the middle, that are doing something somewhat decent, I mean, I guess you could argue, or what some often argue, right, the idea that, public sector doesn't pay as well as private sector. So, you're struggling from a resource perspective. But again, mirror that to the private sector. There are plenty of smaller companies and places like that don't pay that well either, right, that are scraping to get by. Like, I think it's a good, relation between the two, that what we see there is happening here. The question is, as they're putting all this pressure from the government side of, hey, you should be doing this, you should do this, but yet, you go look and like they're not eating their own dog food. They're out, running the same Wild West systems that everybody else is running, and what does that say to everybody else? Like, hey, like if you're 2/3 of the way there, then, I mean, I should be good 2/3 of the way there. I don't have to get to 100%. I can not have these things. Like, let's go start implementing this because that's what you're doing and you're the ones making the rules. So, that you're leading by example. Is it just the right example, right? Should our expectation from the government be higher or lower in regards to how everybody else should be, right? Like, should we be expecting them to set that expectation, or is that just foolishness on our part, right?
I think it's both foolish and naive, but I think it's still, but that doesn't mean it's not reasonable. That may sound contradictory, but I do think that our government should be doing better than it is. But I think it is foolish and naive to think that they ever will. Politics will get in the way. People's egos will get in the way. This is same as any other IT and cyber department in any company you can point to, except for one problem, right? The individual organizations, the individual private sector organizations, don't have the whole of the nation's state secrets, and they don't have IRS taxpayer information. They don't have massive critical infrastructure issues for us. So I don't know where to take it other than I read this report. It shocked me for a second, and then I realized I shouldn't be shocked, and I was sort of unshocked maybe. But and then I wanted to say, well, hold on, GAO, can you give me I feel like this summary, this highlights document, urgent action needed. Is it though? Because if I read this document and maybe it's just because maybe I'm just not understanding, because I don't live in this world every day. But if I read this highlights and summary document, what it tells me is big scary numbers, lots of random things. We haven't there's no priority to any of it. There's a bunch of stuff that we've done since 2010. Then some of it's gotten done, some of it hasn't. I would like to see information such as, here's how many of these controls are in the high, medium, low risk rating category, things that we determined should have been already done, like high, urgent, must do right now. Here are things that out of the 1,600, how many of that 1,600 have been superseded or updated? Because if you're telling me there's a recommendation from 2010 that you've not updated, that's a bigger problem than the fact that it's not done.
Simple,
there's a
simple
whole bunch
things, right? Like, min password length, right? Like, oh, they haven't uploaded that, or they don't have the special care. Like, NIST updated that, like 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah.
So, like, get rid of all that. Like, get rid of complexity, go with the length, And so I think those are good examples of things that potentially are sitting out there on the docket and, have since kind of been superseded with other things, and they just never fell off of that.
That's right. All right. Well, enough of us ranting. I thought I'd highlight this for this show. Next episode, we've got the part 2 of the outsourcing your cybersecurity conversation. But in between, I wanted to put this out here for you guys to think about. Because if you're a CISO, you're leading security somewhere, or if you're trying to do your best in an organization, I want you to not think about this, reading this report and going, holy cow, how broken are they? Because they are. The answer is very. But ask yourself, what does this report look like if it was done on my company? Is this even the right report that to be written? Is this even the right data to be reporting? Is this the best way to report it? And the part that to me is the most interesting, right? So what? The GAO puts out this report. So what? What's the what do we do? Where do we go from here? What do we do? What do we do with this information? What is the recommendation they're saying to do now that I have this information? I don't see any of that here. Yeah. So I'm a little disappointed, both in FedGov and frankly the GAO. I'm disappointed in CISA because it doesn't seem to be having the impact we were all hoping. I'm disappointed in I don't know, innovation, and I'm disappointed that we're still chasing all the AI hype, and meanwhile not even having to put design requirements in, and while legacy systems from the 1970s still rule most of IT. Like, I'm disappointed in all of it, frankly. Thanks so much for that. All right, James, that was fun. Yeah. This is not a great episode to do, right? It's just a kind of doom and gloom situation here.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. It's nice though to sit back and do the comparisons between like private, public sector and see there's not a big difference. Like everything's kind of running for par. I mean, we have that at least. Yeah.
Yeah, everything's running to outdo itself to be substandard. Yay! Congratulations to us, I guess. And on that note, I think we should end it because it's going to get more doom and gloomy as we go.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening. I will catch you definitely on the next one, which is again part 2 of the outsourcing your cybersecurity series. We'll catch you guys another time, another place, on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Cue that music, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. Okay, so